I've got a drive shaft here with a worn out universal joint that needs changing. This shaft is off a piece of agricultural machinery, but the UJ is the same as you would find on a truck or a rear wheel drive and in lots of other applications. The cross has a cup on each of its four ends which are full of roller bearings. It's held in place with four circlips which are normally located on the outside. The first job is to remove these clips. They're quite often stuck. Sometimes a bit of penetrating oil is all it takes, but I tend to just go straight for a small punch to break them free. Now we've got the clips removed, what we need to do is push out the old cross. You push it all the way one way first to remove one cup, then push it all the way back the other way to remove the opposing cup. There are a couple of ways to do this, but the simplest way is with a few sockets and a big hammer. You need a socket that is about the same size as the hole in the yoke, and the hole in the socket needs to be big enough to allow the bearing cup to fit inside it. So that goes on the bench and the yoke goes on top of it. Then you need another socket which is about the same diameter as the bearing cup. This socket goes in the other end. You then hit it with a hammer and push the bearing cup out of the bottom. It's best to use impact sockets for this as they are a bit more durable. Giving it a soak in penetrating oil first is also highly recommended. In 99% of cases, this gets the job done. Now, I've already tried this method with this joint, but it's well stuck in there. This is the 1% case. It's not coming out. So I'll show you another method. What we do is pop it in a press. The piece of bronze underneath has a hole in it like the large socket. There is a top tool just like the small socket. You do have to be careful doing it this way though, because sometimes it can go with that pushed through, it's back over to the bench to remove the first bearing cup.
That was abrupt.
Most of the time you can do this with just a set of slip joints, but sometimes the Stilsons or mole grips might be needed. That's the first cup off. There will be a seal in there as well that needs removing. Then flip it over and push it the other way. So this time we are pushing directly onto the end of the cross. It's exactly the same procedure you use whether you are doing this with sockets and a hammer or in a press. But there is a potential risk doing it with a press, which I will show you shortly. At this point, you're able to break the shaft into two pieces. I find it's easiest to knock the bearing cup out with a punch at this stage. So now we have got one side apart, it's time to do the other. But as you can see, this bearing cup is badly damaged, which is the reason it's been left until last. If I try to push it this way, the rollers might get jammed and cause some damage to the yoke. So I will push it the other way first. So in this shot, the damaged cup is at the top. I can now remove the third bearing cup, mole grips this time, and clear out all of the rollers. Here you can clearly see the damaged final bearing cup. Now that the opposing cup has been removed, there is plenty of movement to allow me in to remove what remains of the rollers. I'm doing this because some of the rollers have already fallen out, so there is a chance of the remaining ones getting crossed over each other and causing the cup to get stuck on its way out. If you end up with one that is worse than this, You can always just cut the cross out with a grinder at this point, then knock the cup out with a punch afterwards. Right, that's all of the rollers out, so that should just press out nicely. Now the cross just comes out like so, and the final bearing cup comes out as well. The next job is to prep the yoke for the new bearing cups. I find a small screwdriver does a good job of getting the worst out of the circlip grooves, then wash all the crud away with some degreaser. Once the worst is cleaned off, you'll need to go around all the edges with a small round or half round file to remove any burrs that the new cups could get caught on. Then the bores need a good polish. These small rotary wire wheels work really well, particularly at getting into the circlip grooves, but if you don't have one, then some Scotch-Brite or wire wool works just as well, it just takes a bit longer. As you are doing this, you need to be checking the fit with one of the new bearing cups. It should slide in most of the way and just nip as it's almost fully in. This one is still a bit tight. With everything prepped and cleaned up, it's almost time to start reassembly. But first, it's worth checking one last thing. Remember I said that there was a risk when using a press? Well, the risk is that you're using very high loads and that there is a chance that the yoke can deform and close up. This is typically only a problem when you have a really stubborn joint to remove. So what I like to do is put the circlips in and then find a gauge that is the same length as the new joint. Then run it round the inside of the clips to check the yoke is wide enough and hasn't closed up at all. I just use this piece of tube that I cut to the right length. You can measure with a steel rule or a vernier as well. I just use the gauge because I find it a bit less fiddly. If it has closed up, you can spread it back apart using a small screw jack like this, or in a pinch, just a suitably sized nut or bolt will get the job done. Be careful though, because the forces involved can be quite high. Time to reassemble. A bit of grease in the bores helps everything slide together nicely, and hopefully helps the next guy, which might be you, to get it apart again next time. Then you need to take two opposing bearing cups off the new cross and slip it into one of the yokes. With that in, you can push in one of the bearing cups, being careful not to dislodge any of the rollers. It should go in almost all of the way without any real effort. You can see how this one has stopped just short of the circlip groove. Then, using a socket, they just require a gentle tap to get them fully in. I'm aiming to get it just past the circlip groove. Then I can fit the circlip, making sure that it's fully in the groove, then flip it over and do the other side. So straight away you can see that something's wrong. The bearing cup isn't sliding in nicely, so stop. Take it off, check that the rollers haven't moved out of place, then have another go. Don't be tempted to just drive it in with a hammer. If you do, it's far more likely that the rollers will jump out of place and cause a problem. There we go, perfect. It was just a bit out of square on the first attempt. At this point, the cross will be quite stiff to rotate. The solution is a few sharp taps on the yoke around the bearings, which just shocks everything into the right place and removes any tight spots. Much better. Now I can connect it to the other half of the shaft. At this point, you also want to check the hole for the grease nipple is pointing the way you want it to. Just like the other yoke, a bit of grease to help it along the way. Then put the cross into the yoke and push in the first bearing cup. As you can see, I've got this one a bit misaligned as well. It's very easy to do, but this one is a bit more stuck than the last one. So here's a workaround. I'll turn the yoke over and put the final bearing cup in. Then I can knock that through with a hammer and a socket in exactly the same way as if I were taking it apart. Then I can just wiggle the misaligned cup out, give it a good check over, and also check for any dirt or debris that might have stopped it going in. Then have another go. It's still a smidge tight, but it's definitely lined up correctly. It does help if you've developed the experience over the years of what a good fit should feel like. Then all it needs is a few taps to push it home. Then put the circlip in, flip it over and finish off the final bearing. The final jobs are to check that it's running smoothly. If it's tight, then, as before, a few taps on the yoke will loosen it up. Then put in the grease nipple, tighten it up, and finally fill it with grease and clean off any excess. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you think this might be useful to anyone, then please share it with them. Thanks for watching and see you next time.